All right, so I got a pretty wild clip here for you guys from NewsMax where one of their hosts, whose name is apparently Grant Stinchfield, interesting name. Okay, so this guy had on a veteran on his show who was basically talking about the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and this guy had some words that the Newsmax host was not a big fan of, specifically pertaining to putting even the mildest criticism on Donald Trump for the reality of the situation in Afghanistan and how the pullout ended up going, specifically referring to a lot of the Americans who have been left behind, I guess you could say, throughout this withdrawal process. So let's go ahead and watch this and see how this Newsmax reporter or anchor reacts to Trump getting the mildest criticism on his show.
I can tell you this didn't happen under President Trump. And I know there's a lot of people on the left that want to try to blame President Trump. He wanted out of Afghanistan real bad. He was real frustrated not being able to get out. But he didn't pull out because he knew this would happen. In fact, we all did. I called it on this program. My 12-year-old son knew about it. And so I've got Americans there that are stuck. To me, that's a hostage situation. But, Joe, I appreciate you working to get them out. I really do, and I wish you all luck in the world.
With due respect,
thank you
with due respect, Grant, I mean, like, veterans, you know, being one, right, and our friends are over there.
Right.
We followed this closely for multiple administrations, and we know the Trump's administration's efforts here were fairly weak. That they were trying to limit the number of people that would get out, and so there was coordination problems.
Joe, I'm gonna cut you. I'm already weak. I'm already low on time, Joe. Cut him off, please. Cut him off now. Cut him off now. You're not gonna blame this on President Trump on my show. That's not happening. Now I appreciate the work that you're doing. God bless you for being a veteran. God bless you for trying to get Americans out. But don't come on this program and take the talking points of the left and blame President Trump. That's not helping anybody. The Biden administration screwed this up from the very start. You know it. I know it. The country knows it. And you call them not hostages. I don't know how you don't call them hostages. They're stuck in Afghanistan with a country overrun with terrorists that are willing to kill them all. I'm mad about that, man. I really am.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, clearly, dude. I mean, we just saw the events that just unfolded like 5 seconds ago. But listen, I mean, this guy just had an absolute mental breakdown at even the idea of applying the mildest criticism. I mean, what did the guy actually say? The actual veteran who he was having on a guest show. What did he actually say there? He just said, like, oh, we've been following this over multiple administrations, and Trump, his response to getting Americans out of Afghanistan, that was kind of weak, even though Biden's response might have been weak as well. That's all he said, right? I mean, the mildest, the weakest criticism you could possibly level at Trump for his responsibility in this entire series of events, and he freaks the fuck out and kicks the guy off of his show and is literally screaming. But at the beginning, another thing that I noticed that was pretty funny in terms of like accidentally being honest, I guess, is that he says that Trump never wanted to pull out, right? Well, Trump is the guy who set the conditions and made the deal for the United States to pull out of Afghanistan. So that's one of the things where I would like almost kind of give him a little bit of credit for initiating that process, because we should have gotten out of Afghanistan. But the way that this Newsmax host portrays the situation is that Trump pretended like he wanted to get out of Afghanistan by doing this deal with the Taliban that we're going to get into the details of. But he's basically saying Trump was pretending to want to get out of Afghanistan, but he was never really going to do it because it would have been chaos, and the events that happened under Biden would have happened under Trump, and Trump would have never allowed that to happen. So that's basically what he's saying there, and he's kind of revealing what I think is actually a true criticism of Donald Trump, right? Even though Donald Trump did start the beginning processes of the withdrawal from Afghanistan by signing that deal with the Taliban, even though he went through that process, he was a coward. He didn't want to make it so that the withdrawal was going to happen under his presidency. Why? Because he was a cuck to the deep state. I mean, listen, I don't want to lecture Newsmax host or Donald Trump on the deep state, the people who are working against them within the military-industrial complex, but that's literally pretty much what has happened, okay? Donald Trump was not going to pull out of Afghanistan under his watch. He was not going to be able to do what Joe Biden did, and I'm not a big fan of Joe Biden, but listen, you got to give him credit for standing up to the entire media, to standing up to the military generals, to standing up to the intelligence officers who have been lying to the American people and lying to the presidency for the last 2 decades. Biden actually had the balls to go and stand up to those people and say, no, listen, I see that your intelligence reports are telling us we need to stay there. I know that the generals want endless war. I know that the politicians that are within Congress for the most part and the media want endless war, but guess what? We're going to end this and we're going to pull out our boots on the ground troops. Trump did not have the balls to do that. And so he's kind of, doing the reverse criticism of that. And he obviously is very pro-war and would have liked us to stay in Afghanistan. But even just the mildest criticism melts this guy's brain into oblivion. So I want to get into what the actual complicity Trump did have for this entire withdrawal process. Well, let's just remind ourselves what was the actual deal that Donald Trump had signed with the Taliban. So Trump took a swing at something his predecessors hadn't, a full-bore effort to strike a deal with the Taliban. It took 9 rounds of talks over 18 months, and at one point, Trump secretly invited the Taliban to the presidential retreat at Camp David on the eve of the anniversary of September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, but he shut that down, and on Twitter threatened to shut down all talks after an American service member was killed, and there was bipartisan backlash over the invitation. And so there's his tweet that you see, and then they continue with the Washington Post here saying, the talks continued in Doha, and in February 2020, Trump announced that there was a deal. The basic contours, the United States was to get out of Afghanistan in 14 months, and you see it was a deal that was struck in February, so that would be roughly May of 2021, which was under the Biden administration, so setting a date that he would not have to actually be responsible for. But again, making a deal that the United States was to get out of Afghanistan in 14 months, and in exchange, the Taliban agreed not to let Afghanistan become a haven for terrorists, to be determined on whether or not that was a promise that they will actually follow through on, and to stop attacking U.S. service members. So this was the big part of the deal that nobody in the entire media seems to want to talk about. There's a statistic that is cited by a lot of these mainstream media figures who have been trying to push us to get back into Afghanistan, and they say, well, almost no troops have been killed in the last year or two in Afghanistan. And it's like, the whole reason why many troops had not been killed is because Trump signed this deal and the Taliban agreed to stop attacking U.S. troops. So the choice that was on the table for Joe Biden after Donald Trump made this deal and set the timetable for the United States getting out, and made as part of that deal that the Taliban would stop directly attacking U.S. troops, basically Biden had a choice where on the table he had 2 options in front of him. Do I want to ramp up the war and send a bunch of troops back into Afghanistan in the numbers of tens of thousands that would be required to actually battle back the Taliban from the positions that they had gained? Or do I want to just complete the withdrawal? And yes, it's going to be messy. Yes, it's going to be sloppy. It's not going to be perfect, but it's what we have to do. That was the choices that Joe Biden had on the table, and I think he made the right one by deciding to continue with the withdrawal and pull out our boots on the ground troops. Now, again, we have to take this in context and understand that Joe Biden is going to be continuing the airstrikes. He's going to be continuing covert mercenary and CIA presence within Afghanistan. That much is obvious. We're going to be working with the Taliban to conduct a lot of these airstrikes against ISIS, which, as we know from the recent drone strikes that killed 10 innocent civilians, not a lot of times when they do these over the horizon capabilities, or they do drone strikes, or they do airstrikes, what they're usually doing is targeting innocent civilians in the process of going after what they are calling terrorists. Now, the situation that Joe Biden had on his table, again, was, do we want to escalate the war, or do we want to finish the withdrawal process that Trump had begun? So it's just completely ridiculous that this NewsMax host would melt down over this. Obviously, Trump has some degree of complicity in how the Afghanistan withdrawal went, since he's the guy who set the terms of how the withdrawal was going to go. And then Biden just had to take over and take on a lot of the flack from the media, take on a lot of the flack from the establishments and the military commanders and the military industrial complex that pushed back in full force against him. But Joe Biden was the guy who had the balls to do that, not Donald Trump. And so if anybody is going to get some degree of praise for doing this, it should be Joe Biden. And the fact that this guy melted down at even the mildest criticism that maybe Donald Trump had some weak spots, it just shows you what Newsmax is, and it just shows you what, again, Grant Stinchfield is as a radio host, or as a news host, apparently, a reporter, a host of a Newsmax show. He's a complete bootlicking fraud, okay? This is all he cares about, is licking the boot of Donald Trump as much as possible, to the point where he will even kick off a veteran from his show for even suggesting that Donald Trump had some weak spots.